So, as you've probably seen in many other Enterprise attempts at KSP, they fail. Either their engines are really off, or they use mods, which I didn't use here. I used all stock parts, no cheats to get this thing out into space. So, how did I do it? I'll show you in a little bit. This here is kind of an Enterprise design. It's more of a prototype. It's more around the Enterprise E shape than anything, but it's really small. If you can see, there's only 2 people in there right now, and they're welded in there more or less, so they can't really get out. But this is my second prototype. I'll show you my first prototype here. As you can see, this one's pretty small. This was purely a test of where to position the engines. I actually did use cheats. I didn't even make anything to launch it with. I just hacked gravity and made it have infinite fuel and just flew it out into space and tested how it felt, where the engines felt they were, and it's small, and for some reason I liked also to call it the cute Enterprise. I don't really know where I'm going with that. Anyways, let's get to the launch. Alright, you can see that I used some of the new stock parts, which include that massive tank and lower powered large engine. These fuel tanks are efficiently hooked together so that they all drain into each other, and then once one drains, it lets go, and all the other fuel tanks are still completely full, even though all 5 rockets are gone. So this was efficient and very powerful. I will admit, it wasn't the first time that I just built this and threw it together and put it out in space successfully. No, it took me about 7 different tries. The first 5 had to do with the engines, and then the last 2 had to do with the Enterprise being, like, kind of deformed after I launched it because of all the weight and stress, and it, like, removed a couple of struts, and it didn't work very well after it. But here I'll just show you the sped up version of getting it out into space, so you know I actually did this in the real thing. So that flight was relatively smooth. There was one weird thing I noticed at the end here, and that's in these 4 fuel tanks, not all of the liquid fuel was used. A lot of the oxidizer was drained. I don't know if that's something with the new update that it uses more oxidizer in space or something, but maybe it's a bug. I don't know. Anyways, we're disconnecting the Enterprise here, and this is the orbit is not completely finished yet, so I'm going to have to use up some of the fuel to finish up the orbit, which actually ends up being a fair amount for some reason. Alright, now we can see the real beauty of the ship. This thing is packed with RCS ports, and the saucer section on this is kind of a square more than a circle, but in the next, again, this is a prototype, the next one will be more circular and a lot larger. This one's also very sleek, just so then the problem with the center of mass wasn't that great. Controls very smoothly. The little light on the bottom there, it was for lighting up the bottom of the ship, but it ended up looking a little more like a little deflector dish, which is actually kind of cool. But other than that, you can see there's 2 torpedoes on it currently. I can put a bunch more on with this type of torpedo. It's mainly just RCS with ports, and it can actually gain a lot of speed. It also has a probe, so it can be somewhat homing. It's quite the graceful ship. Its engine's on full throttle, although it isn't necessarily an Enterprise where it has warp capability, but this is all stock parts, no mods. I'll skip through the parts of trying to get this thing in the orbit, and while that I'll talk about my next Enterprise. Now the Enterprise I'm building now is a lot larger than this one and is not as sleek, and will probably look a little more like the Enterprise kind of A, with the engines a little lower, because in the Enterprise A, the engines are really high up, like above uh, the center of mass, obviously, and that's not going to work, so I'm going to have to lower the engines a little bit, but I found out a way to keep all the weight at the top, so it's going to look really nice. This next Enterprise I'm making is actually big enough that I'm going to have to fly it out in space in 2 pieces, because I think it's a little too heavy for me to fly it out in one large piece, even with all the new rockets. That's how big it is compared to this one. Now, this thing on a full tank is very, very hard to move and takes a lot of thrust. As you can see here, it takes actually a pretty big chunk out of fuel, of all the fuel in there, just to get it in orbit, to fix up the last amount of the orbit still left in the atmosphere. Now, this is, I actually am surprised that this thing has kept pretty stable as of, I have flown it to Joule, and I'm going to be making a next video on how I flew it to Joule. And it's, why I'm surprised it's stable is because the center of mass will slowly flow to the bottom, since all the fuel tanks are connected in the way that it just goes to that middle section and then up through the engine, so the saucer section gets completely dry of fuel before the middle section actually starts using its fuel up. Now that's going to be a main problem in my next ship, which I have no idea how I'm going to fix that, because if it flows to the bottom, and how I've set it up, the saucer section is much higher than the middle part, and the engines are at the saucer section, so if it drains through that middle part, it's going to go haywire. But anyways, that is the ship I have for now. I'll be showing you another video of me getting this thing to Joule. I actually have not returned it back so far as I am speaking this, so I'm not sure if it's actually going to get back to Kerbin or not. I think it will, but you never know. And I think after that, I'm going to bring it into combat, using its little torpedoes, just to test some combat, and see if I can actually build upon that in my next ship too, because that'll be interesting. I hope you like this, and I hope you'll be in the next video too.